Kia ora everybody, it's really great to be here. I found it so inspiring and I hope that what I'm talking about will make connections with other presentations that we've heard, including the most recent one about issues of speech and voice. So I'm not presenting a paper, I'm really talking about some ideas, and the starting point for that was a dilemma in which quite a paralysing dilemma I realise as I've been sitting here today and yesterday, that I found with my own research. So one of the things that has really struck me today, listening to people and the way people have talked about themselves, is that as Shiv indicated, there is not a simple distinction between an academic and an activist. I mean, there are certainly academics that are not activists and vice versa. But, many of the people here are in various ways activists, academics, different kinds of practitioners that are all those things. They're also teachers. And also I just want to, introduce the vexed but important term of an intellectual. So you are an activist and an intellectual. You might at some point be an academic and so on. And I see myself as primarily a feminist, and I guess I would say a feminist intellectual as well as an activist. And I think doing intellectual work can be activism. It isn't always, but it can be. And it's perhaps inseparable, you could say, from certain kinds of activism. So I was a feminist before I was an academic, during and after, and also an activist before, during and after as well. And that's true for many of us in different ways. So I'm really against that idea of a split. Also, ironically, like a number of people here, I'm located within a business school. And as opposed to, say, an arts faculty where I did my original degrees. And one of the ironies there is we're being encouraged to engage with practice and practitioners all the time in a very certain kind of way. But we are. So in an ironic sense, the split between working where I do and engaging sort of, as you might say, out there, or as some people like to say, the real world, it's seen really differently. So that's some of where I'm located. And also some of my recent work, I would say, has really been looking at inequality within the university, and especially sexism and racism, and when I say racism, the place of the treaty in the university. So that's the way I've thought about it, and I'm interested in inequality between academics, and one of my, I guess, enduring frustrations is the critical work that is done by academics that do not look at their own location within the university. And sometimes it's actually, uncomfortable as it may be, more comfortable to engage with activists outside the university than to actually be an activist inside your university, biting the hand that feeds you. It is uncomfortable in a certain kind of way. So that's where I'm coming from. So I'm suspicious of, the we. There isn't really a we. Like here, there's a group of people that are interested in considering certain issues, but as let's say academics, there's not really, it's a very variegated we with, tremendous differences in terms of power relations and privilege and disadvantage. And I was really interested in, not here, but talking about Auckland University, that with, the university is those cleaners that have now been outsourced, it's everybody. And just thinking about that, I think, is a powerful approach. So what we see here is a film crew, and my work in recent times has been about film work and film workers, and this is my starting point for my dilemma. And so these are the living bodies of film workers, people, human beings who I've sometimes interviewed and written about, and that's thrown up some tremendous political dilemmas for me. And I want to work through some of those a bit. So I've thought about the idea of being a traitor and the idea of betrayal, because as people have indicated in various ways, we might be serving or betraying the university. We might be serving or betraying activists with whom we might, or on whom or to whom we might be doing research, for instance. So what would constitute service or betrayal? Because I think for a lot of us, people have spoken very passionately, and I especially noticed that in the sessions today, about their commitment. So there's a service here. So drawing out, who are we serving? And what are the contradictions between some of the service and the specificities. So who are we? So who am I in Wellington? Pākehā woman, feminist, academic, people working in Wellington. Film industry plays a certain part in the sort of imaginary of Wellington, the economy of Wellington, and in New Zealand, of course, too. So, talking of traitors, I want to start off by talking briefly about Mike Joy. So people will know who Mike Joy is, I guess. He's an ecological scientist working at Massey University and who has been called a traitor in recent times. And I want to tease out a bit of that before I talk about my situation. So first of all, this is John Key's reaction to press reports where Mike Joy was in effect positioned so that he was, and really did contest the concept of 100% pure, clean, green New Zealand. So John Key said, when he was confronted, and he was, rather caught out on a British television program with the claim that New Zealand isn't clean and green or 100% pure, and many native species were close to extinction, and 90% of New Zealand's lowland rivers and that of half of all lakes are polluted. He disagreed. That's Mike Joy's view, but I don't share that view. He's one academic, and like lawyers, I can provide you with another one that would give a counter view. Quite a famous comment of John Key's in terms of the way that he's thinking about academics. So what might the response to that be, and what are some other comments that were made? So another intervention was by someone called Mark Unsworth. He's a consultant lobbyist that works in Wellington, and he wrote some rather rude emails late at night to Mike Joy that were leaked by Russell Norman on Facebook. And he said, "Letting your ego run riot worldwide in the manner that you did." He was interviewed by American journalists. "Letting your ego run riot worldwide in the manner you did can only lead to lower levels of inbound tourism. You may not care given your tenure in a nice, comfy university lounge, but to others this affects income and jobs," he wrote. "Give that some thought next time you feel the need to see your name in print in New York, and possibly think of changing your name from Joy to Misery. It's more accurate." So there's actually a lot of themes here that we've already discussed, I think, in the last day or so, which is, first of all, it's not only business people that attack academics for having tenure in nice, comfy university lounges. And academic life is seen by those outside academic life in many different ways, but among others as a place of privilege. And this, I think this is important that Shiv was raising this point about, who do intellectuals serve, and is there a role for intellectuals? Is there a role for academics? Are they meant to be supporting the tourism industry? Are they meant to be supporting a certain kind of social activism? Does the fact that they have got secured jobs make them bad people, and so on and so on. So it's interesting that the terms of critique here are some of the terms of critique that activists would also bring against academics, which is that you can just sit there and you don't have to think about us. I also look at income and jobs, and activists are also very interested in income and jobs, and I'm often reminded of the kind of West Coast contest that's positioned as something like mining versus ecology. Of course, there's lots of problems with that bifurcation, but, this idea of these are our jobs, it's all very well for you because you're not affected, but we are, it's our jobs, and people feel passionately about that. So these are some of the terms of critique of Mike Joy. Mike Joy responded, if he wants to have a go at somebody, he should have a go at those who are polluting our rivers, not the guy researching it, he said. I'm pretty disgusted. I've been quoted in this article commenting on the state of the environment, and people have called me a traitor to this country. I'm just the one doing the research. Well, my guess is that many people in this room, probably all of us, would be like on Mike Joy's side here, but it's interesting, I'm just the one doing the research. So, if we were criticised by social activists, would it be okay for us to say, I'm just the one doing research, don't blame me? It's actually not that simple. Key goes on to say, New Zealanders had to be careful not to run the country down with research which might not be factually correct. So I think factually correct is really important here, because this implies that if it was factually correct, things might be different. And this is where we have the institution of science and the way it appears in a certain kind of way, which is really probably quite different from a lot of the work that a lot of us would do and our truth claims. So, Mike Joy is backed by the New Zealand Association of Scientists, and they said, the clear statement is the potential damage to New Zealand's reputation, economic benefit of big spending American tourists outweighs the need for truth in public debate. This is an issue the association takes very seriously. So this is the question of truth, and we have the paradigm of the scientist as, I suppose, the academic par excellence in a way. They just find out the objective truth, and the rest of us can kind of do what we like with that truth, but, you know, they are the truth givers. So, you know, to me there are a lot of problems with that. And one of the problems, of course, for someone like me or many people here is that we don't tend to produce research on the whole that would have the aura of truth, like scientific, objective truth. So for some of the work that we might want to do in terms of social activism, it's hard to do that. Some statistical work can have that kind of authority of truth, but a lot of what we want to do isn't like that. So what I'm saying here is that in the defence of Mike Joy and in the story of science versus politics, or the truth about pollution versus tourism, there are some key themes about what academic truth is, and a lot of those key themes we can't actually really use when we're thinking about social research. So, the idea of betrayal and patriotism. So, I'm drawing here from some work on how Russell Coutts was seen as a New Zealand hero and then seen as a traitor when he went off to Switzerland or wherever he was. Was paid large amounts of money, apparently a bad thing, in order to be part of another country's yachting project. So, and he talks about patriotism, a betrayal or being a traitor as the refusal to serve the compulsory demands of the national we. So what is that national we? Or, for that matter, who is the we that are concerned with social justice? Who is that we that we might serve? Who does issue those demands? And how do we know what is service and what is betrayal? Also, this we is constituted as a New Zealand story. I'll see if I can really quickly and easily bring up... Yeah, I'll see if I can really quickly and easily bring up this link. And yeah, hooray, good. Okay, so I don't know how many of you are aware of the work that's been done, in particular by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, on the New Zealand story. But this is just their opening page, and they have, I'll show you, I think, hope to find it here, the chapters. And they have, and then they talk about, oh, here we are, open hearts. New Zealanders have got open hearts. And then they go on to tell various stories about the open hearts of New Zealanders together with visuals of that. Genuine care for the land is another one. See nice Māori people exuding kaitiakitanga. And so on. So you get the idea. These are very familiar images for us. This is a story that's been carefully crafted for policy purpose by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. But you can see it includes tourism, and our Prime Minister is the Minister of Tourism, a low-paid industry to which New Zealand is being shoveled. And this story has been crafted to provide a message within which New Zealand policy and the image of New Zealand has to be constrained by. And the people that are a part of putting together this New Zealand story include a wide range of people, not just from government, but from various business sectors. I'll see if I can close that down. So, okay, so what I'm emphasising here is there is an official New Zealand story. A lot of work has been put into it in the last few years, and it includes tourism, and in my case, and importantly, it includes film. And Mike Joy has been caught up in this story because he's told another story, which is not okay, and also in a different way. I've been caught up in the story, and so have many others. So, briefly, thinking about what betrayal is and the critical attitude. So giving an account of the interlocutory conditions whereby one is asked to give an account of oneself or ask others to give an account of themselves. This is Judith Butler's work, and she argues that the political, ethical situation that we're in, part of thinking about it, to think about is what are the conditions whereby we ask other people to tell us their stories, and we've been talking about that, how people feel ripped off and pissed off. They feel ripped off and pissed off when you present back to them a story about themselves that they don't recognise as them, but also the accounts that we give of ourselves. So what I want to do is just work through, I've talked about Mike Joy briefly, and I just want to talk a bit through, oh, someone's online. Yes, I hope they're not going to suddenly pop up and Skype us. Okay, so the work that I've been doing is about working workers in the film industry, and I should say that I'm part of a group of four, along with my colleague Judith Pringle at AUT, and our colleagues Ellie Henry and Rachel Wolfgram, who specifically looked at Māori screen production. Okay, so, however, the key thing is we interviewed people that were basically film workers, in other words, not so much the famous directors, producers and so on, but what we could say crew, broadly speaking. Okay, we produced some work regarding that, and we were attacked by John Barnett, who's a very big fish in New Zealand. Being a small country, very big fish, very small ponds can have a huge amount of influence. Second only perhaps to Peter Jackson and Richard Taylor, John Barnett, very successful producer. So I just want to think about the critique that he made of the work that we did. The thing that I haven't shown here is, first of all, he criticised us because the study had taken 3 years and cost, paid a certain amount of money, and he said that it could all be done in a week and it was completely ridiculous to take 3 years over it. So that would be a very common criticism that of the research that we do that could also be made by activists, which would be, how come academics spend all this money and take all this time, taxpayers' money basically, doing research? If they're going to do that, well, who's that research for? Should it just be for them to enhance their careers and publish impenetrable journal articles? So again, the kind of critique that was coming from John Barnett would be quite similar to the kind of critique we might hear from others. So okay, so first of all, then he goes on to say that what we came up with was no secret. So first of all, the kind of statement that we made, this was via our university's media people, very difficult trying to explain studies to media people and to produce little blips for the university. So we talked about the exploitative nature and the complexity of the exploitative nature, in particular, of film work. So in other words, people work in extremely precarious conditions, they work for extremely long hours, there are many problems. So first of all, it's no secret. So this is often the case with practitioners, and we might include social activists or film producers here. People get pissed off if you tell them something they already know because it's no secret and they could have told you that. So in other words, if you say what they would say, that just goes to show that you're useless. But on the other hand, and then he went on to say that's not something you should complain about, and that would be the difference between him and me. We both agree on the situation. We disagree about whether that's something you should complain about. Okay, so that's the other thing, and so what right do I have, I'm not in the industry, what right do I have to complain about something? So early on, for instance, when I was doing this work, a draft of something that I'd written was circulated to someone at Film New Zealand. Film New Zealand is the organisation that tries to get people to come here and make movies. And I got a complaint. You shouldn't publish stuff like this. People won't want to come and make movies here. So the assumption, therefore, is that if you're an academic and doing research, you should be doing it for the industry. And like the university, the industry tends to be the producers, basically. So there are a number of assumptions here about what research should do. So should it be there to serve the industry? So let's say that I want to say that I wanted my work to serve the workers. Then that's my other problem. So
We've got lots of time.
Okay, good. That's great. Okay, so if I was thinking about this in relation to a social movement, what social movement would this be? So some of you, and if you were in Wellington at the time, will be particularly aware of the furore that erupted in Wellington when it seemed, and I say seemed because it wasn't even the case, that the work of the Hobbit would be taken out of Wellington, or in fact New Zealand, and go somewhere else. That was never going to happen, as it later transpired. An industrial relations furore broke out. A tremendous amount of tension, which we actually as researchers were very aware of as we'd gone about doing our research. A tremendous amount of tension between employers, workers, different groups of workers, in this case the actors as opposed to, we might say, the techos, New Zealand, Warner Brothers, global labour. This all kind of erupted and came to a head. And those of you who will recall the National Party's rationale for changing the law, so we're kind of a certain kind of economic zone whereby people weren't allowed to have any industrial relations rights for the purposes of filmmaking, that all happened in the name of New Zealand. And you may know that the Labour Party in Parliament gets called Hobbit haters. If you're a Hobbit hater, that is the worst kind of betrayal you really can. If you're a Hobbit hater, that's like the worst. And obviously you're not a patriot. So the role of patriotism here was extremely important, and it was very significant that the situation with Mike Joy erupted just before the launch of the Hobbit-related tourism campaign which followed this. They were particularly pissed off because they were just poised to launch this. And a number of people have written about this in New Zealand, done really interesting work. So this march or protest, which I've never written about, but really it would be so great to write about, was actually not the workers arising and saying, hell, don't take away our right to organise. It was the workers arising. They were the workers from Weta Workshop, Stone Street Studios and so on who had got work for the first time in ages, many of them, and really high-paid work temporarily. Mobilised by Richard Taylor, the head of Weta Workshop, and they actually got together a demonstration and marched through the centre of Wellington. So this was very strange. This was an employer-led demonstration. And again, it really reminded me, because I have had some involvement there, of people on the West Coast who feel passionately and violently, and I mean that term, when they feel that their work is going to be taken away from them. And as against that were the actors, and in particular several high-profile actors from Actors Equity who were seen as, and attacked viciously really, as betraying those others. So we actually had two groups of workers in relation to each other. It was a really complex situation. So this was the very time when we were doing our research. So this was extremely difficult for us. Well, in fact, for me, because I did the research in Wellington. So, for instance, I made a decision not to speak out about this issue at all while I was interviewing people. Because I felt that if I did, that people wouldn't speak to me. I felt quite confused about my role. The kind of work we were doing was doing life history research, where we were asking people to really talk about their working lives themselves, how they saw themselves and how they saw themselves in relation to the film industry. So we weren't asking them about this issue directly. But I felt very caught here, and I was just thinking about this sort of Freirean idea that was raised earlier today, or I think it was yesterday, which is, what ethical responsibility do we have to the people that we're working with? Now, for me, the ethical responsibility has been a lot clearer in the past when I've worked, or like now I'm working with a group in PSA. And I'm pretty clear that we share a political agenda. I still might want to say some different things from what they want me to say, and that is still actually an issue. But primarily, we could say on the same side. But in this case, it was really complex, because I saw these workers as in a situation of tremendous vulnerability. Jocelyn's done work on this as well. And exploitation. And as some people say, self-exploitation. In other words, they saw themselves as creatives, they saw themselves as entrepreneurs, they saw themselves as drivers of their own fantastic creative careers. Actual violence was threatened against actors. People would say things like, actors better not walk down Stone Street, which is, the studios in Miramar. There was just tremendous rage. And it's extremely difficult to then think, what was my position in relation to this? I did feel really quite stuck. So, income and jobs. They were really concerned about their income and jobs, if you can call them jobs, because they're not really. They're short periods of precarious work, but very desirable, and not desirable only financially, but because people love to think of themselves as creative. They love to think of themselves as involved in this fabulous national project, which was the brilliance of Peter Jackson, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and so on. So that's the whole sort of glamour, the mystery, and the mystique of it. So if I'm thinking about my particular work, I might think, well, which social movement might I be talking about? I mean, I did talk to unionists as part of the research that we did. I did do some later work, again, with others, including unionists, about this issue. But in relation to this particular kind of research, I've found when I'm giving presentations and I spot one of the people that I interviewed in the audience, I feel very stressed indeed. And I still do. So having a respectful relationship with them has been really hard. So I think these questions are just questions for many people. So who to betray and who to serve. So it's just some suggestions about a range of positions that we might take. So first of all, carrying out objective true research. This is like a scientist might do. And this might be something that might kind of insulate us from certain kinds of critique. We could do high-level analysis which doesn't involve relationships with other people. One of my colleagues calls this inorganic research. He likes to do this. It's all very high concept and you don't have to actually see in the room with you people that you've been working with who might want to give you shit. Speaking for others, which is complex, and I think, you're talking about the difficulty of that. I certainly could not speak for those others. Who could I speak for? And a lot of my own research recently has been participatory because, in a way, at least I'm clear that I'm speaking for myself. Speaking with others in their voice, that might be more like my work with PSA, which is partly participatory, but they get the say, and it's a clear-cut contract. It might be some kind of advocacy with or for others, in other words, not just producing research, but then leading on to actually be an advocate. You might be finding out stuff for others that are just really, really busy, and what they would like to know is what are the pay statistics for this particular group in this industry. And for them, that's the most valuable research. To me, not exciting or interesting, but for them, the most valuable. And then finally, the consulting, as we might say in the business school, actually giving advice. So, I'd be really interested to know in your thoughts about some of your situations. As people have presented here, there's just a range of quite specific ways we need to think about those sets of relationships.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.